our webinar on the CEO buy-in, selling the non-dues revenue vision. But years ago, I used to convene meetings of a group called the Partnership Professionals Network. They were in-person meetings once a month in the DC area. It was kind of an open agenda, and we talked about all range of things. It was sponsorship pricing, packaging, benefits, recruiting, prospect lists. The topic that came up more than any of the other topics was challenges that sponsorship professionals had with their leadership and usually with their CEO. And Barbara was at many of those meetings. And the first couple of meetings, we started taking notes, and the participants who ran sponsorship programs at associations looked at me with some suspicion. It was like, you can take notes with the highlights, but don't include my name because I'm going to tell stories about my CEO that I don't want to have published. So that kind of got us on this track to presenting this session. So I am Bruce Rosenthal. I am a former association executive. I was VP of corporate partnerships at a large national association for a number of years. We kind of launched that program in 2009-10, just when the economy wasn't doing too well, and revamped the program to add value for sponsors. And then the last 8 years, I've been a consultant, advisor, coach to associations on creating sponsorship programs to increase revenue and member value. And last month, I published a book, Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships. So just a couple reminders, and then we'll introduce my friends and colleagues. Put your questions in the Q&A so we can track the questions easily. And feel free to participate in the chat and pontificate and share ideas, and we'll take it from there. So let me turn it over to my colleagues. Vanu.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Vanu Deschetti. You may have known me as a event tech person. I am still in event tech. I'm just now not with a tech company. I am actually have started a new venture called the Event ROI Coach, helping associations work with their event data, and that translates into working with data across the organization. So I'm very excited about today's conversation. Bruce, thank you for having me. Barbara, on to you.
Well, hello, I'm Barbara Armentrout. Like Bruce, I'm a former association exec, and I have been working in the non-dues revenue space for more years than I want to count. And I am now a standalone consultant helping associations revitalize their non-dues revenue programs. So speaking of which, let's get this one rolling. Bruce, can you tell us a little bit about the role of an association CEO in establishing a non-dues revenue program?
Sure. I think there are 5 key roles for association CEOs. And let me also mention, for everything we talk about today and on the subsequent webinars that we do, this can be scaled up or down. So whether your association has 3 staff, 30, or 300, it's all definitely scalable. So if we mention numbers or numbers of staff or dollar numbers, just scale it up or down as is appropriate. So, the first role for an association CEO is not to seek non-dues revenue just to balance the association's budget. And I used to work for an association, and the person who sold the sponsorship program never knew what her revenue target was until after the association's budget and finance committee met. And she would sit there in her office on the day of their meeting and wait till 5 o'clock and then get the word from her supervisor, oh, the budget and finance committee said they rolled up all the expenses, all the revenue, we're $300,000 short. Add that to your target revenue for sponsorships.
Oh,
that is not
strategic.
A business plan. That is not strategic. That is not a business plan. So it is not just we want revenue and ask the sponsorship person dial for dollars and get more revenue. Secondly, to set realistic goals. So this is kind of a follow-up to the earlier point, and really look at history, look at the data, look at customer needs, look at the competition. Look at the program's value proposition. Most non-dues revenue, most sponsorship revenue in particular, is not philanthropy. And it is a very competitive space out there, and companies aren't just going to continue to write checks. So there really needs to be realistic revenue goals. And I was talking with a client about this recently, and the client said, we are the best association in the space out there. We don't have any real competitors. We are the only one. And I said, well, I've been talking to your sponsors, and they're looking at a lot of other, not only other associations, they're looking at the webinars they produce. They're looking at Google ads to get leads, which they sometimes, one company said, we can get more leads from $10,000 of Google ads than a $1,000 sponsorship in an association. So ouch, it's really necessary to set those realistic goals. And third, to incorporate non-dues revenue in the association's strategic plan. that this is really an overarching goal. It applies to the whole association. It applies to providing revenue and member value for the whole association and all programs. So it really should be part of the strategic plan. And I don't see too many strategic plans out there that really talk about revenue other than just kind of an add-on on the last page and, oh, we need revenue. Barbara?
And Bruce, I just wanted to mention, I know when we've talked about overarching goal, you've mentioned how an association, everybody has to pull together when it's annual meeting time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may not be part of your job description, but you bet you're going to be there doing things for annual meeting. How does that relate to the non-dues revenue goal?
Well, it definitely relates because you're right, Barbara. There is a role for everybody, and the annual meeting is a good example because sometimes associations will say. In fact, I remember we had a number of folks that came to those partnership professionals network meetings that said basically, my boss said, "Go in my office, make calls. I'm sure Google will give us money. I'm sure there's some big companies in the exhibit hall that'll become big sponsors." And the CEO said, "Don't bother anybody else on staff, and don't bother me as a CEO. It's just your job." And we wouldn't really say that with any other program at an association, even though associations sometimes do operate in silos. But especially, as Barbara said, with the annual meeting, everybody has a role.
Mm-hmm.
So folks on staff say to the sponsorship director, "Oh, I really don't have time to help you with that now." Or I was talking to an association just last week. Sponsorship director had put together kind of a marketplace, online marketplace fair for their corporate partners. And she said, "I had to market it myself because the association's marketing department said they were too busy." Well, what would we do if we were getting ready to launch the website for the annual meeting and went to the marketing team and they said, "Yeah, we're working on some other projects now, so we're going to have to put off that annual meeting promotion for a few weeks." This is a leadership role. This really goes to that marketing person's boss and to the CEO. Why is that marketing person kind of on a different program, on a different reservation than the association? So as Barbara said, there is a role for everybody on staff, and that really starts with the CEO carrying that message. Fourth major role for the CEO is ensuring that all of the non-dues revenue programs are in alignment with mission and the needs of members. And that is not always going to be a good fit with companies. There are going to be some companies that are going to say, "We want this, we want a lead list, we want the email list of all of your members. That's all we want." And it is fine to say to those companies, "I'm sorry, that's not what is in alignment with our mission. It's not a good thing for our members. We can talk about other workarounds. If that doesn't work for you now, fine, we'd be glad to sell you a bigger exhibit booth, talk about some ad purchases." The partnership does not work all the time, but it should be real clear to companies. And I think it's fine for associations to have sponsorship and non-dues revenue guidelines, both so the association's board and staff understand what the guidelines and the guardrails are, and more importantly, so that the companies understand. And I've worked on those guidelines with associations, and as has Barbara with some of the associations she's worked with. And usually the last sentence in those guidelines, if the company violates these guidelines, the CEO of the association has the authority to terminate this sponsorship. So I've never seen it come to that, and there's usually a discussion along the way, but it is important.
And if they violate, we don't give them money back. I mean, we might, if we want to disassociate ourselves with somebody who is misbehaving, but no.
But that also gives a dialogue to create that relationship, right? You know, hopefully you never get to a point where there's a violation because you have this relationship with the partners and sponsors, right?
Yes.
And so you're heading off any issues that might happen. And then if they do, then you have a relationship and an understanding of this is not cool. You can't do this, right? But at least that relationship, again, this goes back to, Bruce, what you always talk about in terms of it's important to know the people you're working with, that you're asking money for. It's not just a transaction of give me your money. It truly is a relationship. It's marriage or dating or whatever you want to call it.
But at the same time, sometimes we're dealing with larger corporations where the people we're dealing with, everything is in alignment. But one of their other departments might do something that, you know, raises eyebrows. So that's why we need this backup language in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. No, and you're right, Vanu. That really, through this vetting process, it should be pretty clear that everybody is on the same page along the way. And the companies understand that. And as you said, it really is a partnership. I have a slide in one of my PowerPoints that the word partner is a noun and a verb. And a lot of times associations and companies, oh, we're a partner. We're good to go. But I use partner as a verb. It's really working together, collaborating around common goals. And the fifth major role for the association CEO is budgeting for appropriate staff and related expenses for the non-dues revenue and sponsorship program. And we would do that with any other program. So again, looking at parallels, if the association were going to launch a new research initiative or distance learning initiative or revamp technology, you need to budget for that or hire a consultant or do a competitive analysis or look at what the staffing needs are or the goals for the initiative. It's not just say, well, this has improved a little bit that there are more sponsorship and partnership professionals on association staffs. But back when Barbara and I were convening those partnership professionals meetings 10, 12 years ago, seldom was there anybody around the table who had sponsorship or partnership in their title. But they came to the meeting because this was their job. So we would get through the introductions to stories like, well, I'm the membership director and my boss said sponsorships are just another membership category. Sell those too. Well, when you have three things to sell, and this is a new thing, it's probably not going to get the attention. Or folks would say, well, I've generally sold exhibit booths, which is a incredibly important function for associations that have successful expos. But they were often then told, oh, now you're in charge of year-long corporate partnerships. It's the same companies. So just sell those too. Or even the marketing person would be told, well, now you're in charge of sponsorships. So we really need to budget for ideally a senior level staff person to work on non-dues revenue and sponsorships. And I had a client a number of years ago, and I did kind of a check-in with them after the consultation was over, after we had built the whole new sponsorship program. And I did a check-in to say how it was going. And they said, well, we assigned the new sponsorship program to a manager level marketing person. And she doesn't really feel comfortable calling the companies and negotiating with them. So we really haven't made any progress. So the association really should have looked at a director or more senior level person with the experience, with the background. And that's, again, a business decision. That's investing in that. It's not always a huge investment up front. I've worked for a number of organizations that as they've begun to sell more year-long corporate partnerships and the money comes in, then they hire a more senior level person to work on the sales and nurturing and fulfillment with those companies. So just kind of a quick summary. So the five major roles for association CEOs, not to just seek revenue, but to really have a plan. I said realistic revenue goals based on history, data. Third, incorporating the non-dues revenue program as an overarching goal, ensuring that the program aligns with the association's mission and needs of its members. And then fifth, budgeting for appropriate staff and resources to run the program and be successful.
Bruce, I think it's really interesting how you started off with like defining what that role is for a CEO. What is their responsibility? Because I think there is a shift, right? That's happening or has and continues to happen, especially with associations, from instead of being someone that's just managing an association in terms of all the people, just kind of being the puppet master, right? Like just making sure that everyone's doing their job, to actually running an organization that's strategic in whatever industry that they're in, which goes beyond just how many people renewed their membership or got their membership or how did our annual conference goes. We're now looking at association leaders that have to do a comprehensive management of this association, which means looking at other revenue generators. It's literally running a business. I know that we, in the association nonprofit world, we don't like to talk about how we have business drivers, but we do. We need to stay afloat, right?
Yep. Yeah, I'm working with an association, a nursing association, one of the many. And I was talking with the association CEO, who's a trained nurse and moved his way up into nurse executive in large healthcare systems and is now CEO of the association. And he said, as you just indicated, he said, we're running a business here. We need to recognize our value proposition. We need to appropriately monetize it, which a lot of association CEOs don't say. So he's talking about, we need to monetize, we need to run a business. And they said, but I'm just a nurse. What do I know? So you can be whatever, as he said, just a nurse or just a whatever and running your association and be in alignment with the mission and the needs of your members. and recognize what your value proposition is to companies and to monetize that.
I also think a lot of what you're talking about here is not only applicable to CEOs. Boards, I think it also can be applied to boards, right? That are heavily involved in revenue generation for clients, not for members or for the association. Blah, blah, blah. For it all, right? Like the money at the end of the day goes to help everyone out. I think a lot of what you're talking about are conversations that should also be had with a board who, if they don't have revenue goals, should they?
The board should definitely, from that strategy standpoint, not the day-to-day, which candidate should we hire to run the sponsorship program, but definitely non-dues revenue should be on the agenda for board meetings. And I think this does go back to the role of the CEO in really leading the board to address board members' concerns about sponsors. Like Barbara and I talked to an association CEO a number of years ago who explained that the association had a modest sponsorship program that they terminated 2 years earlier because the board did not want to have a board dinner with the sponsors. So because of that, they just decided, well, let's just end the program.
Yeah.
So I had an experience a number of years ago
strategy.
when I worked in an association where we did schedule a strategy meeting with the total support of the CEO and organized by the CEO, where it was a 2-hour meeting where the board members sat at round tables with the corporate sponsors, 6 or 7 board members and a corporate sponsor at each table. And questions with a facilitator like, what's keeping members up at night? What are the biggest challenges for our profession? And I was sitting next to the board chair, who was sitting there like this with her arms crossed, did not want to be there. So first of all, I'm thinking, well, I think the CEO probably tried to coach her, but I guess it didn't stick. So, but she's sitting there, we get 5 minutes into this conversation about what's keeping members up at night and the good discussion with the board members at the table, the corporate sponsors at the table. And 5 minutes into the discussion, the board chair leans over to me and says, Bruce, can I borrow a couple of sheets of paper off of your pad? And she furiously takes notes for the next hour and a half. So sometimes it does take that coaching and nurturing of board members, which is, again, a great role for the CEO to make sure the board members are supportive. And I think really to your point, Vanu, this is part of the board's role all along. So it really should be part of board orientation, part of board duties to have something on the agenda about non-dues revenue. Do we have new corporate partners? Who are those corporate partners? What are they providing to the association in terms of revenue and content? And to say, wow, the association was really stuck on this issue, big new issue relating to whatever tariffs or global economy or all the new issues coming up, we didn't really have the expertise on staff. So we reached out to one of our corporate partners and they did a webinar, educational webinar for our members last month about this topic. And that provided real member value as well as helped us demonstrate the value proposition of the association, and we could monetize that. Board members should know that and that was the role. So that then when those board members are going through the exhibit hall or sitting at that board dinner with the sponsors, it's not just, hi, thanks for your check last month. It's thank you so much for doing that webinar on tariffs. That was really critical to helping our members understand this. And that's when the corporate sponsors are like, wow, so that creates a competitive advantage for the association because often sponsors do just get the, oh, wave, thanks, appreciate it, bye. But tell me more about what your company's doing with tariffs. How does that impact our members? That's when sponsors are delighted to have that discussion and be engaged.
Well, I want to dig a little deeper and say, okay, I don't know exactly who's on the webinar today, but some of them are not the CEO. And if they are, we're preaching to the choir, which is great. But if I'm on staff and my CEO is not as enthusiastic as might be helpful, what might I be able to show them? Or how might I be able to coach up? Because we all know that anything that the CEO supports has a much higher degree of success than anything that gets a box checked off. And actually, I'm wondering, so Bruce on that, and also Vanu, if you can tell us any little data points that might influence a CEO favorably. But Bruce, what can we do staff to CEO? What have you done that's worked well?
Well, I think a lot of it is the competitive analysis, I think, volumes now, because to go into the CEO and even say
some of them,
it shocks some of them. And whether it's that person in charge of sponsorships doing their own research or going to other conventions in that space and saying, wow, we've got a company that has been aligned with our association for years. They really cut back their conference sponsorship. Now they have a 10 by 10 booth. And I went to one of our other association colleague conferences recently, and that company was a major sponsor and was featured at why is that company going over there? Or, the sponsorship person could say, wow, we just got a flyer that one of our top corporate partners is doing their own webinars. In fact, I was talking to an association a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about competition, and the director of sponsorship said, we are really ticked off because one of the companies that used to be a sponsor dropped their sponsorship. They are now doing their own webinars, and they are paying our members to be on their webinars. Not that members are not doing anything wrong. They're being tapped as subject matter experts. We will give you $500 and donate $500 to your favorite charity. Will you be on our corporate webinar? And the company's doing their own webinars. So I think to demonstrate that's the reality. It's not necessarily a deficiency of the association. No one's doing anything wrong, but companies are looking for value now, and they will attain that value. I think it's always important to add that companies would prefer to work with the association and leverage that brand affinity with the association. But if the association says, oh, we could do a webinar, and if you submit a proposal and we'll have it reviewed by the committee, and we can get that webinar out here in 6 months, the company's like, we've already created our own online community of your members. We could do our own webinar and get it out there in 6 weeks.
No, absolutely. And I think it's also important to know, Barbara, to your question about, how do you kind of manage up and persuade your CEO, your ED, that these are good ideas? I think it's just not only about the data points, but there's kind of a psychology, sociology to this too, right? Like understanding what your ED, CEO, what's important to them? What are some of their initiatives? What has the board charged them with doing? And then understanding that and speak to that. So if a CEO is their big initiative for this year is to increase membership by X%, then going into it, whatever message or whatever data points you do bring to the table has to speak to that, right? Because especially if non-dues revenue is not part of the conversation yet, in order to bring it in, you've got to relate it to the rest of the organization. So, the example there would be if membership is number one priority, then you figure out how does a non-dues program or event or asset that you're going to offer, how does that impact membership? Then you've caught their attention. Now you're helping me meet my goals, right? That's kind of human nature. That goes for any, at any level, right? Because Bruce, you talked about it, right? Like, why would I do this if it's not part of my job description? Until it is actually integrated with it, I don't have interest in it. So, but once you tell me what I'm interested in, how it's going to help me, I'm on board. I'm listening, and I think you reverse engineer those data points from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, somebody came to one of the Partnership Professionals Network meetings years ago and said that he would go around to each department head on staff the week after the association's budget was approved and say, what did your department ask for in the budget that was not approved? Maybe I can find a sponsor to work on that program. You've already vetted the idea. It's needed by members. We have the infrastructure to do it, but we're lacking the dollars. So you asked to do 5 webinars, only 3 were budgeted. Maybe we can find some sponsors and maybe even do that webinar on the sponsors platform and let them pay for all the tech around it and reach a larger audience of members. So you're absolutely right, Janu, to find out what motivates everybody on staff. And it is a change and a transition because I think a lot of staff remember, oh, yeah, we gave that company an opportunity to do a webinar and it got real salesy and it was very inappropriate and none of the members liked it. Okay, that's true, but that goes back to setting the guidelines and having a senior level person on staff to work with those companies and to say to the company, okay, you're doing this webinar with us. We really appreciate your expertise. This is going to be educational. You're not going to start off by talking about the history of your company and your corporate org chart. Can you come up with an example of something your company has done to help a member? That'll get people's attention. So it is that coaching, and I think it's really having the CEO agree, yes, we need a qualified director or VP of corporate partnerships or sponsorships to work with each company to provide the coaching, to provide those connections with others on staff to make it successful for the association. I think the one other way to look at it to get the buy-in from the CEO is to look at the issues where the association does not have the expertise or does not have the staff. And again, I think whether associations has 330 or 300 staff now, there are a whole range of new issues around executive orders and tariffs and the global economy and workforce issues and mental health in the workplace.
And
new legislation coming along. In fact, years ago when I was working for an association when the Healthcare Reform Act passed, so-called Obamacare, and we were at a senior staff meeting, and the discussion was how many calls we were getting from members who said, what are the deadlines? That there are a lot of guidelines here. What are we supposed to do? And what are the penalties? And we looked around the table and the policy staff said, that's an 1,100-page regulation. We haven't quite read it yet. We don't know. So the CEO, again, taking a leadership role on this, said, well, don't we have a corporate partner who has expertise in this? They're a consulting agency. So we reached out to them and said, we really need your help with this. We value your expertise. And we put together, the consulting firm put together a PowerPoint presentation, and we co-branded every slide with the name of the association and the name of the corporate partner company. And we launched this webinar. And the faculty was this, again, the role of the CEO. The faculty was the CEO of the association and the CEO of the consulting firm partner. So it checked off all the boxes. Members first, met the needs of members for great information on an 1,100-page regulation, and it met the needs of the corporate partner, positioned as a thought leader, not just a thanks for your big check. And the association benefited by having happy members and happy corporate partner. But that really started with the CEO at that senior staff meeting saying, don't we have a corporate partner who can be involved in this? And I would be glad to be on that webinar to co-host it with the corporate partner.
Now, Barbara, I've heard you tell stories over the years about how you've been part of programs, revenue programs, where something didn't exist and you've had to create new programs, and you've had to kind of do an internal buy-in for that, right? Get people on board with that. I liked, when you tell these stories, you quantify it. Like you not only say, oh, wouldn't this be a great idea? You are actually saying, not only how does it help members, but you're also putting like a potential dollar figure. Like if you don't do this, then you're leaving X amount of money on the table.
I got called into a board meeting once because I had not sold the Wi-Fi sponsorship, because I'm sorry, this is not 1,000 years ago. You expect to get the Wi-Fi, but I had significantly increased the sponsorship for the opening reception, and part of that was I was going to give the microphone to the sponsor for 5 minutes. I was guiding, I was standing there actually holding the microphone. But the board was just frantic about it. We've never done this before. What are we going to, what do we have to, you're welcome. I want you to show up. If you could smile and say thank you to them, that would be very much appreciated. But you don't have to worry about this. It's taken care of. And then I also explained to the CFO what part of that was exempt from UBIT because they were doing it as an educational presentation to support the membership. So, but yeah, I do try to quantify.
Well, it's looking at it like a business. Instead of looking at, and a lot of associations, because they're very siloed, and Barbara and I hear this from a lot of companies, they're hearing from getting 5 different sales pitches every month from 5 different departments in the association. So somebody's selling exhibit booths, an outside agency is selling ads, the public policy department selling white papers, the education department selling webinars, and nobody's collected the data.
But whoever is calling first into that company gets the budget money. And then the next 4 people calling get shut out.
Right, and are an irritant to the company. But I think this gets back to another role for the CEO saying, we're running a business here. We're irritating companies by multiple calls. And what I found, the company will almost always spend more for packages than pieces anyway. But what we sometimes hear from the association staff is, well, the reason I'm making these calls to companies is because my public policy department has a revenue goal of $20,000 to sell white papers. So I have an answer. Take their revenue goal away. Give their revenue goal to the sponsorship person. And this, again, is a CEO level down to the CFO. Divide the money at the back end if you need to, and give the public policy folks their $20,000. But if Barbara can go out there in charge of the whole program and sell an $80,000 sponsorship instead of these different departments selling $6,000 or $7,000 a la carte sponsorships, $80,000 is a lot more money. And then divide it up on the back end, or figure out another way to compensate staff for their time and their input. But kind of the siloed approach, which is not a business model, it's not a business strategy, and it's not data focused. Anything more news on the data side of that?
Yeah, well, Bruce, I think it's interesting because the data actually is there, right? It is being collected. It's just not being presented or analyzed in a way that it gives any insights to anyone.
Actionable.
I almost would say, like let's take that on as a task before you even come up with a program, right? Is figure out what is the data telling you, because that's going to also define what your program is, what value you really have to your other partners. And it doesn't have to be a difficult task. This should be a task that the association should be taking on anyway, right? It's like trying to figure out where the data is, what's important, what should we focus on. And I'm not saying you have to like build out these big dashboards and technical reports and whatnot, but figure out what's important to the association. Is getting more revenue more important? If yes, okay, well, what data do I need to know to see if we're on track or where we could make more money? And that the data is going to tell you that, right? It's also a big asset. And I'm not saying like sell your data. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that the data is going to tell you what your attendees value, and it's also going to tell you, and when you know what they value, you're going to know what partners to bring to the table. And that builds even a better program, but also kind of informs the board, the CEO, the CFO, right? As well as to what direction to go in. Otherwise, it's a lot of data. It can be too much. But if you have those goals and you're strategic about it, it can be very manageable.
And when you're preparing a prospectus for your sponsors, some of that data is essential there. If I'm going to be investing and buying an exhibit booth is one small piece of what it costs a company to exhibit at an organization. They've got the travel, they've got all these other expenses. I want to know, if I've not participated in your association before, who am I going to see? Are they going to be people who are interested in the message that I'm bringing? What kind of time am I going to have with them? And what's the general culture of the group? How can I get myself the best prepared? And some of those stats, we know this cold. We do. And we just need to be sure we're sharing that with our sponsors, as well as knowing from our education department, from our meetings department, from our C-suite, what do they think is the important thing that we are delivering when we're doing events?
And I think especially right now when associations are dealing with so much uncertainty with just, programs, especially with their events, the cost of events, are people coming? Are my government speakers coming? There's so much there, right? If you've always just kind of reported to the CEO your trend of, how many people register week over week, and that's all they're used to seeing, and they either hear the message, I'm behind or not behind.
Right.
In these times, I would strongly suggest to look at the data to actually present, this is what we're at risk for. And so if that's the case, if your event, especially in the event world, right, if your conference or meeting is at risk for losing X amount of revenue, what are you going to do? You got to figure out how to replace that revenue, right? There's that discussion and there's the buy-in. That's how you get their attention of saying, you're about to lose money. So you got to come up with plan B. And hopefully plan B will eventually become a stronger plan A for the whole association.
So I think it's important, for CEOs to lead with the message that, of course, we're not for profit, we are mission focused, we are member focused, and we are running a business. And it doesn't mean that everything will make money all the time. But one of my restaurant analogies, how did I get halfway into this webinar without mentioning one of my restaurant analogies? If the local deli is selling 2 tuna fish sandwiches a day, life is simple. Take it off the menu. It's not worth creating that whole bowl of tuna fish salad for 2 sandwiches a day. And if somebody comes in tomorrow and says, I'll have a tuna fish sandwich, you say, I'm sorry, we don't have that on the menu, but look up at our display board. We have 15 other sandwiches. What would you like? And associations sometimes tend to, we're losing money on this every year, but we're going to keep doing it because fill in the blank. It's somebody's pet project. The board really likes it. Losing money, recognizing that in the data and recognizing you're losing money is not necessarily a plan for success. especially if that money can be put towards, hiring that appropriate staff expertise to run the sponsorship program.
Although going with your restaurant analogy, I mean, we've all seen those restaurant shows where they are rescuing the failing restaurant. The first
Mhm.
thing they go to is that big honking menu that has so many choices. And we need to be sure we don't do that to either our members or our sponsors and say, here are 5 pages of ways you can spend money at our next annual event. And oh, by the way, we'd also like you for a year-long partnership. Are you in? And it's like, oh
Right.
my, I don't
It's
have
the
time.
diner effect, right? Cheesecake
Yes,
Factory, Silver
right.
My gosh.
And since most of these are now delivered, online, email, it's an immediate delete. I do not have time to wade through this. If you already know me, if you have been listening to me throughout the year, and you know what my needs are as a sponsor, and you know what your members' needs are, tell me how we can put them together. Don't give me the Cheesecake Factory. Yeah.
Right. So our friend Jay posted a question in the chat. What's the one
Oh,
thing a typical CEO is most hesitant to do when it comes to sponsorships, but actually should be done and should be at the top priority list? I
excellent
think what
question.
most CEOs hesitate to do is meet with sponsors, and not just to meet and thank them. But I used to work for an association where when I started working on the sponsorship program, I got a call from a corporate partner, wanted to come in and meet with the CEO and the staff. So I went to the CEO and said, "Can we look at your calendar?" He said, "Get with my executive assistant. You don't need to ask me. Just go
Mm,
to my executive assistant, find an opening, get it on the calendar. I will be there."
what a treasure.
And he hated the term vendors, usually did not refer to the companies as sponsors or partners. His favorite term was business friends, which changed the whole tone of the meeting, both from the standpoint of the corporate partner and the staff when others on staff were in the room, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, these are our business friends. And the way he would conduct the discussion was not to give a lecture or a presentation on what the association's latest priorities were. It was to mostly ask questions and show interest and show empathy and
Mm-hmm.
learn from the corporate partners, because the corporate partners are out there all the time, every day, meeting with
Mm-hmm.
members. So he would ask, what are you hearing? And we would learn amazing things, everything from new trends with members to things members were challenged with, to a change in leadership at one of the state affiliates. And it would be a great conversation with business friends. So I think just companies, CEOs that meet with companies is a great approach. So kind
And
of
I'd love to ask you 5 more questions, but I think we have used the time we have reserved with our audience.
great. We will thank you very much, everybody, for your time. So we have 2 more webinars in the series coming up. Webinar number 2 is 3 Easy Ways Data Can Transform Sponsorship Programs on Wednesday, June 11th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Webinar number 3, Reinventing Your Revenue Strategy, How to Take the First Step, Tuesday, June 24th at 11 a.m. So thank you to everybody. There is a recording that'll be made available within a couple of days. And Vanu, one last message.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for attending today. So make sure you can definitely connect with us here on LinkedIn. We'll make sure you get these and all sorts of good info back out to you in your email box. Give us a couple of days. But I want to let you know that we've got going on. So Barbara, Bruce, and I were talking one day, wouldn't it be great? We're always talking about how the whole association should come together and, have a kumbaya moment and get this buy-in that we're talking about, right? And we're like, wouldn't it be fun to do a workshop for the association? So if you're an association and want someone to come in and have, be able to have this and facilitate this conversation with your whatever departments you feel or whatever staff that you feel are relevant to the conversation, we would love to do that. It's a 4-hour session. It's a hands-on workshop where we'll just come in and be your friend, be your advocate for 4 hours and pull information from your team. By the end of the 4 hours, we're hoping that you have a plan where you've got their buy-in.
You will have a plan. You will have a plan.
You'll actually walk away. It's a working workshop. So don't think you can come in and sit and eat popcorn or whatever else people do in workshop. This will
Now,
definitely
this is roll up your sleeves, but we won't make you do any burpees.
You promise, Barbara. But
Great.
you can get
No,
more
that sounds-
information here with this QR code. We'll also attach it to the emails that you will get. I promise one email.
Thanks, Vanu. Great opportunity. So one kind of closing thought, and we do have a couple minutes if anyone has a last minute question to pop into the chat. If anyone wants, if you are a CEO, here's kind of a quick message. If you are wondering, conversation starter, if you go into your CEO's office or call him or her this afternoon and say, oh, I listened to this webinar this morning on the CEO role. One thing you could remind the CEO of, the association's members and the sponsor's customers are the same people. And now with this kind of open access on Zoom and online communities and social media, companies can now reach and teach directly. We are talking to the same people. So far better to partner as a verb, partner with companies to work on behalf of your members and to monetize that for your association. Because if you don't bring members into that tent and bring the sponsors into that tent, the members and the sponsors will create their own tents and the members will go over there. So those individuals that we call members are also the customers of the companies. They are the same individuals. And those members are looking for information. They're looking for solutions. They will get it wherever they can find it. And we'd rather have them find it with the association and not going off to that company's workshop on their own. Anything else, Barbara?
I think you've covered it.
All right.
Excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
See you at the next webinar.